Okay, it's official. I'm ready to start a dialogue that the Las Vegas street circuit is actually one of the better street circuits on the calendar. What do you think? What's going on, guys? Welcome back. It is the morning after the Las Vegas Grand Prix because by the time I got to bed and the race was over, it was about 2 a.m. and I did not have the energy to record this. So we're doing it in the morning after, giving me plenty more time to percolate the ideas forward to the top of the brain, and we're going to talk about it. And I think we'll kick things off with our race quick hits like always. We'll talk about our weekend winners and losers, along with some special honorable mentions in there as well, just because so much happened this weekend. And then we'll round this out with our predictions results as we wrap up the Las Vegas Grand Prix weekend. And yeah, let's go ahead and let's kick things off with our race quick hits. But before we do, if you haven't already, subscribe down below. I know we're coming to the end of the F1 season, but there's still plenty to talk about. And if you enjoy that, we would love to have you join our little community. As well, leave a comment down below what you would give your rating for the Las Vegas Grand Prix. I know what I would give mine, but I would love to see what you guys would give it yourselves. And as always, only if you enjoy it, like the video if you do enjoy this video or Formula One action, because we are about to get underway with our race and weekend quick hits. Let's get to it. I don't think we can start anywhere else in our quick hits besides Max Verstappen officially becoming a 4-time world champion this weekend, beating Lando Norris on track and therefore securing the world title in Las Vegas last night. What an unbelievable run that he's been on. It's definitely cannot be understated that winning 4 in a row is not easy. Only a handful of drivers have ever done it. And congrats, Max. It was a maybe not quite as clear-cut of a win this year as we expected when the season started. But at the end of the day, by the time the season is over, you are crowned world champion once again. So congratulations. You've definitely earned it this year. Alright, let's move on to talking about Mercedes, because I think other than Max winning the world title, I think the conversation this weekend is all about Mercedes, in which all of a sudden, once again, they just have one of those weekends where they dominate from start to finish, and they end up with a dominant 1-2 at that, with George securing pole position and winning the race, and Lewis, even though starting in P10, secured a very dominant P2 in this one as well. So a 1-2 for Mercedes, a very good weekend for them. Apparently all it takes is 10-degree weather and all of a sudden that Merc comes alive. I don't know what is up with that, but at the same time, it was nice to watch. It was nice to see Mercedes come to play once again. It seems like they're always kind of bouncing around between being pretty decent and pretty terrible, and then all of a sudden every once in a while these sort of weekends will come along and Merc will dominate once again. So George secures his 3rd race win in his career, and Lewis breaks his own record for most podiums in F1 with, I believe he's now up to 202 or 203 podiums. So definitely another one to add to the tally for Lewis, and George with another race win under his belt. Cannot understate it enough. They had a very good weekend. Now, I mentioned it at the top of the video. I think it's time to start a dialogue about the Las Vegas street circuit and about how it actually is one of, I think, the better street circuits on the calendar. There are a lot of interesting straights, there's a lot of interesting corners, and I think it promotes a lot of actually very interesting racing. And while I do think it necessarily does come down to tire strategy in this one, I think with the perils and the high-speed nature of this track, the strategy kind of gets the importance of it gets ramped up just a little bit, because all it takes is one moment, someone in the wall, like Franco Colapinto in qualifying, where all of a sudden your strategy has to be perfect and you have to be on the right tire at the right time to really make it work the best. And I think we saw that play out in this one, where the tires were not lasting as long as we were expecting. I think when everyone going into the race expected a 1-stop, it ended up becoming a 2-stop, except for, I think, Kevin Magnussen. And so it's one of those interesting ones where it became very obvious that strategy and tire life is going to be the big talking point in this one. And while the street circuit does promote a lot of like DRS trains and stuff like that, we saw a lot of overtaking down that back straight and a lot of very interesting moments, because not only were you able to follow cars relatively closely, you were able to make moves at some interesting positions and parts of the track, not only just on the back straight coming down the strip. And so I think I'm ready to start talking about how the Las Vegas street circuit might be one of my new favorite street circuits on the calendar. I still prefer, obviously, purpose-built tracks, but at the same time, Vegas has produced two relatively good banger races, and this year I think was banger for an entirely different reason, which was just the strategy of when to pit, where to pit, what to pit to, and were you able to get the most out of your new tire life over others. And I think it was fantastic. We saw battles up and down the field, and it was thrilling to watch. It was 50 laps, but it flew by because it was just so much happening all the time. I'd love to hear what you guys think about this. Let me know down in the comment section below. All right, let's move on to Ferrari, and we'll talk about, I'm not going to touch on the drama. I know I woke up to a lot of the drama that's going on. Charles not seemingly very happy with Ferrari and the way that they've sort of handled him, maybe not even this race, but also kind of over his career with Ferrari. And so it's interesting to see Charles' frustration kind of boil over like that, but I'm not going to touch on it any more than that because I don't know anything about it, and so I don't know if it's really worth much talking about. Let's just say Charles not currently very happy with Ferrari, and when you have a 7-time world champion coming into the team next year, hopefully they can get that ironed out, because I think that could be a very fun team to watch next year. And it's not all hunky-dory in Maranello right now. But let's talk about them in this race. Ended up getting, was it a P3 and a P5 in this one? They were split by Max in this one, or Max split them, rather, I should say. And so I think honestly it was a very decent weekend for Ferrari. I think I expected them to kind of perform a little closer to where Mercedes was. I think Ferrari definitely was the second fastest team in this race, but at the same time, it was a very interesting race where it never really seemed like they were quite on top of the track in this one. And maybe that just had to do with Mercedes being that good that, you know, any other weekend Ferrari would have been the fastest team and kind of been fighting there at the front. I think they maximized their points that they had available to them today. There was a lot of drama down the stretch with Max and kind of where he ended up being positioned. But I think ultimately Ferrari had a very decent weekend. Carlos ending up on the podium. They end up putting a good chunk into the McLaren gap to P1 in the Constructors, in which now they are actually only 25 points behind McLaren in the Constructors. And with McLaren kind of being all over the place right now, I don't think it's out of the question that Ferrari could overtake for P1 in the Constructors, which I think is entirely possible because McLaren is kind of all over the place right now. It'll be interesting. I think we'll learn a lot. Practice one in Qatar next weekend. So that's something to keep an eye on. But Ferrari, decent weekend. I'll kind of lump McLaren in here in this little talking point. McLaren just not on the pace at all weekend long. I think I expected, like a lot of people, for Lando to come out and perform very, very well. The McLaren has been pretty decent. We saw how good they were in like Baku, which is a very similar-ish sort of style street circuit to Vegas with a lot of long straights and, you know, importance of straight line speed and low speed cornering. But that said, they were never anywhere near the pace. I think they were pretty comfortably the third or fourth fastest car this weekend, and it was a tough one to watch because I think all of us, while as far-fetched as it might have been, was kind of excited at the prospect of the championship fight continuing on at least until Qatar. Obviously, that didn't end up coming to home to roost. I think they finished P6 and 7 on track or something like that. So double points finish, but it's about as an anonymous double points finish as you can get. Words are hard sometimes. So now that they kind of freed up, they can focus entirely on the Constructors' Championship starting in Qatar in the sprint race. But at the same time, must be a little disappointing that you had to go out of the Drivers' Championship quite looking as down as they were today. We're going to briefly touch on it, but Haas officially re-overtake Alpine for P6 in the Constructors in fabulous Haas Vegas. Nico Hülkenberg, you absolute beauty, qualified P9 for the weekend, finished P8, and finished just ahead of Yuki Tsunoda on track. So not only were Haas not overtaken by RB, they were the ones doing the overtaking on Alpine for P6. They finished with 4 points. They now lead Alpine by 1, and I believe now VCarb remains 2 points behind Haas and are now only 1 point behind Alpine. So in about 3.5 points separate the difference between P6 and P8 in the Constructors. These last 3 races, including the sprint race, are going to be very fascinating to watch because I think Haas have cemented themselves as in contention for fifth fastest car, but Alpine has shown a lot of pace, and I don't think this necessarily would have been the case had Pierre Gasly's engine not blown up over the course of this one, because Gasly obviously qualified P3, He has been driving like an absolute animal the last few race weekends, and I think that definitely is part of the reason why we were able to re-overtake for P6. But at the same time, sometimes it's not about being the fastest car. Sometimes it's just about making it to the line. And we did that, and that's P6 in the constructors. Let's head on. Qatar, let's do it. Io, Haas, Nico, Kevin. Let's get it done. Speaking of the battle for P6, V-Carb and Yuki Tsunoda. Yuki ends up being the top Red Bull driver. That's not Max Verstappen on track once again, finishing just ahead of Sergio Perez on track and finishing well ahead of Liam Lawson, who had a lot of issues over the weekend and just couldn't seem to get on the pace. But Yuki has been driving very, very confidently, and I can't not wait for Christian Horner to somehow find some way to not see this result from Yuki once again, who has been digging and clawing his way forward and just beating the crap out of his teammates so far, and even Sergio Perez on track. And so Yuki had another fantastic result for him. I don't think there's anything to be wrong to be taken from, you know, this race by Yuki. I think it just ended up being a strategy call where the big thing that we saw was Nico end up catching him towards the end, and I think Haas actually did the best strategy possible here when a lot of teams dove into the pits earlier in the race to try and cover off each other's early pit stops. Haas made the decision to have Nico go a little longer, to have that tire delta, the tire offset later in the race, and we saw it as Nico charged back through the field to finish P8 in this one. And so I don't think there's anything wrong. I don't think Yuki made any major errors in this one. I think they maximized what they had available to them with their strategy, and Yuki was a great drive. Finish ahead of Yuki, finish ahead of Checo, finish ahead of Liam. I don't know what more you could do. I know I've been rambling on. There's a lot to talk about in this race. It was banger from start to finish, but I do think Zhou Guanyu deserves a special shout out here, as we saw him make it into Q2 when Valtteri Bottas did not, and we ended up seeing him finish P13 and actually run in the points for a fair amount of time, kind of on pace. For some reason, there was something about this track that just spoke to Zhou this weekend, and he actually had a very strong weekend. Obviously, it did not lead to points, but at the same time, it was a very good race by him, and I have to mention it here because Steak and Sauber need these little wins, and so it was worth a shout out. So here you go. All right, let's move on to our weekend winners and losers. We'll begin with weekend winner, and my honorable mention for the weekend winner this weekend is Nico Hülkenberg and Haas, coming off of a Brazil Grand Prix weekend, which I don't know if more could have gone wrong, with Kevin being sick, the conditions really not suiting the car, and just a torrid time the entire weekend. To turn around, get back into the points, get back P6 in the constructors, I have to give a special shout out. This might be my own personal bias, but I think Nico ran about as perfect as a race as you could have gotten this weekend, and I wanted to give him a special shout out, especially as a Haas fan. But that said, my weekend winners have to be Mercedes. To come back once again, to have one of those weekends where you just look dominant from start to finish. They went 1-2 in practice 1, 1-2 in practice 2. George was fastest in practice 3. George took pole. George won the race, I believe. He didn't lead every lap, but I mean, he basically led every lap, and just drove off to the distance. And if Lewis hadn't had the pace that he had, probably would have won by double-digit seconds up the road. Lewis, on the other hand, basically went the other way, was fastest in practice 1, was fastest in practice 2, 10th in qualifying, thanks to just 2 mistakes in Q3, charges through the field, and ends up actually almost chasing down George Russell by the end, but made one mistake going into the sphere section that ultimately I think kind of had him kind of back off from the charge. But Lewis said, I believe 11 fastest laps on his charge towards George in P2, towards P1. So very dominant weekend from Mercedes. Have to give my weekend winner to them. I don't think there's any other person or team that really deserves it. I think a lot of people would consider Max to be the weekend winner, but at the same time, I don't think any of us ever doubted that Max would win the title. And this wasn't if Max had dominated kind of like how George had to win the title, I probably would have given him my weekend winner. But overall, I expected Max to win the championship, and this weekend it was a formality almost with the pace that McLaren had. So I'm giving my weekend winner to Mercedes because they didn't just earn it, they went out and took it. All right, other side of the coin, weekend loser. And it's not necessarily an honorable mention for weekend loser. It's more of an honorable mention for a special shout out and plea towards the Williams mechanics mental health. They have had an absolute just meat grinder of the last few weeks. Obviously, a lot of crashes in Brazil in quick turnarounds. A massive crash by Franco Colapinto, who, by the way, so happy to see that he was doing okay. I saw that it was like a 50G impact in qualifying. Thankfully that he seemed okay. Williams managed to get the car turned around once again, but my goodness, guys, take a break. Yeah, I'm sure you cannot wait for the season to be over to take a break, but please, your hard work and effort have been seen, and I know that you're not necessarily getting the points and stuff to reward you for it, but we see you, I promise. That said, my actual pick for weekend loser officially is going to be Alpine. Not necessarily for one thing or another. I think it's more of just the opportunity cost loss of this one. You had Pierre qualify in P3. You had Esteban looking pretty decent over the course of the race itself in terms of pace. I think there was a good opportunity for Pierre to finish potentially closer to the top 5 than not, but ultimately his engine gives out partway through the race. I believe it was on lap 16 or 17, so pretty early on. So it really hurts to see that. As a Haas fan who's watching his team fight Alpine for P6 in the Constructors, I will say I'm happy that Haas did do that, but at the same time, I hate when you see teams and drivers like Pierre have these amazing qualifying results, but just not have the result itself to back it up at the end of the weekend, because he was flying all weekend. He's been driving with so much confidence this year, and unfortunately just one engine gone in a moment, and that was his race effectively. Not even effectively, his race literally over. And then Esteban obviously had his snafu with the pit stop, where he was called in for a pit in which he was greeted to one singular mechanic waiting in his pit box. And so effectively Esteban had a drive-through penalty that he and his team imposed upon himself. Obviously had to go around once again and make another pit stop, effectively ending his race there. He was well at the back, and it's hard enough to charge through the field when you're a driver like at the top of the grid, let alone when you're in an Alpine, which while is good, maybe not necessarily enough to charge back from P17 on the grid towards the point. So Alpine's day effectively ended when Pierre's engine blew and Esteban gave himself a drive-through penalty. So I don't know exactly what happened there, but I think at the end of the day, when you see the pace that Alpine has been had, especially coming off of a double podium in Brazil, this has got to be a bit disappointing, and I have to agree. Unfortunately, Alpine, you're my pick for weekend loser. All right, we only have this left, our predictions, results. Let's go through my predictions and see how I did this weekend in Vegas, which actually ended up being pretty okay, but at the same time, I was way off in other places. Let's kick things off with my prediction for biggest positive surprise. I went with Lando Norris. No, I thought Lando was going to come back from Brazil more motivated than ever, but McLaren just did not seem to have the pace this entire weekend. So while he finished in the points, nothing more to do there. Definitely not getting the point for that one. Moving on to my pick for biggest disappointment. I went with Alpine because I thought there was no way they would be able to repeat what we saw in Brazil. I did have a bit of a scare moment when Pierre qualified P3 on Friday. I almost said on Saturday, and qualified P3 on the grid. Unfortunately, his engine blew up, and as well as Esteban's botched pit stop. We covered it already. Definite point there for biggest disappointment. Take a look at my picks for qualifying. I had a Lando Norris P1. I had a Charles Leclerc P2 and a Max Verstappen P3 in qualifying. No, no, just no, not at all. We had a George Russell pole, we had a Carlos Sainz P2, and we had a Pierre Gasly P3. I don't know if I could have been more wrong than that. So a big old goose egg in qualifying for the first time in a while, I might add. So definitely a little tough scenes there. On to my pick for the race podium. I had a Lando Norris win. Absolutely not. I had a Charles Leclerc P2. Absolutely not. And I had a Carlos Sainz P3. Ding, ding, ding. One singular point out of both qualifying and the podium. I will take it though, because I need it. And then, of course, our last prediction, our one crazy prediction. I officially predicted that Haas would overtake Alpine for P6 in the Constructors, and ding, 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 I got that one spot on. The cheer I let out in my home when Nico overtook Yuki there with about 10 or 11 laps to go, and then immediately put a second gap into Yuki. I was up, I was clapping my heart out because I knew this prediction was coming in. I knew Haas was re-overtaking for P6, and I knew it was all coming home. So ding, ding, ding on that one. So all in all, when the weekend is said and done, 3 points remain, which actually leads the community this weekend. First time that's happened for me in a while. But if we take a look at our predictions standings now after the weekend is all done and dusted, let's see here. I now sit on 74 points. British remains in the lead, but the gap is narrowing ever so slightly. He's on 76.5. Sennel with 72.5. Tough weekend for him. F1 Inferno now with 53 points, and Andrew still on 45.5 points. So all in all, a very good weekend for me, clawing back just a little bit in terms of the prediction standings with 2 weekends to go. All it's going to take is one really good weekend for me and a down weekend for others, and I might find myself on the top step here. Time will tell, though. We're going to start getting back into the lab, into the kitchen, chefing up some predictions, and we'll be back stronger next weekend, even more so than now. But guys, what is next in F1? We are in the final triple header of the season, but now it's a back-to-back Qatar up next weekend, the final sprint race weekend of the year. So we get one practice session on Friday, and then we're straight into sprint qualifying, sprint race, main qualifying, Grand Prix on Sunday. Last year, I believe we saw, what was it, a Verstappen, Norris, no. Last year's podium was a Verstappen Piastri Norris podium. I forgot that Piastri was just rapid in Qatar last year, so we'll be interested. We'll keep that in the locker for predictions coming up here in a few days. But guys, what do you think is going to happen in Qatar? We are coming up to it. Predictions video coming here in a few days as we prepare for the second to last round of the 2024 season. Hard to believe we're here already. But guys, that's going to wrap it up for me here in this one. I know I rambled on about this race, but it was an exciting race. I have to say, Vegas delivered once again. Back-to-back years, Vegas was banger. Could not complain whatsoever. But guys, once again, if you haven't already, subscribe down below. Leave a comment below giving me your rating for the 2024 Las Vegas Grand Prix. And if you made it this far into the video, give the video a like rating. It really helps me out. But guys, that is going to wrap it up for me here in the Vegas weekend. The American races are over. I know you Europeans are cheering your heads off over there. But guys, that is going to wrap it up for me here in this one, and I'll see you in the next one.